Eddie, welcome to the studio.
Oh, thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you for coming by.
Yeah.
So I get to talk to you regarding two of your roles. You are Superintendent of Dundee Community Schools, which is part of Monroe County,
That's
Michigan,
correct?
correct? And you're also co-chair of the Early Learning Cohort of the School Superintendents Association, the AASA. Now, a lot of folks might think of those as totally separate roles, but my guess is that you see them as different offshoots of your same personal mission.
That's correct. You're absolutely correct. When I am a superintendent of a local school district, I obviously am living and breathing what my colleagues around the nation do. Everything from dealing with personnel issue items and then also being able to take care of balancing the budget. But then the thread that kind of weaves it all together is the fact that I have this passion. It's really a calling to make differences for kids and for especially early childhood education. Being a former kindergarten and first grade teacher, I still really see myself as teacher-in-chief, not just a superintendent. So I really appreciate the idea that on a local level I can be there to, make an impact for my students in my district, but then my scope and sphere of influence in the role as a co-chair of a national committee of superintendents is much broader, because as that co-chair, I am doing work that has influence over 50 million public school students and, the scope of the entire nation. So it's really gratifying.
And I want to ask you about that because, as you know, early childhood matters most, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. So, in fact, 2 years ago, we had a work session at our National Superintendents Conference, which was actually in Nashville, where we are right now.
Yes.
And it took us 2 hours to come up and wordsmith those 4 words together. We had a national group of superintendents and other individuals pulled together, and it took us 2 hours to get early childhood matters most down pat.
Well, you know the old joke, right? How many superintendents does it take to come up with a motto? I'm kidding.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot, actually.
A lot is the punchline.
That's right. That's
so
right.
I want to hear about that, but very quickly, because I know you're proud. Tell me about Dundee Schools.
Absolutely. So Dundee Community Schools, we are located in the northwest corner of Monroe County. We are a rural community.
Yeah.
We're a growing district. So we've actually added about 300 students over the last 3 years since I've been there. This is my 4th year in the district. And we have just over 1,800 total students. And it is just this phenomenal haven for families and children where we really do value every child that comes into our district. And I know 2 weeks ago we had our national conference, and the national cohort came and made a visit to our district.
Some 40 superintendents?
Yep. We did. We had 40 superintendents that were all rural-based superintendents came, and they spoke to our staff, and we held a work session where they came and observed our teachers in action and then gave us feedback on what we're doing. So it was a great experience all the way around.
Are there particular challenges in early childhood education, let's focus there, that rural schools and rural districts face?
Yes. Staffing is a big priority. It's hard sometimes to
finding
yes.
or experience, or both?
Retention of staff, finding staff. It is a major challenge for rural districts around the nation. And then, of course, the idea that because you're rural doesn't necessarily mean that you're out of step. Like we are trying to do everything we can from a cutting edge standpoint. So I think there's misinformation about how good rural schools really are, because in the country, the majority of superintendents are superintendents of districts. Almost 3/4 are 2,500 students or less in the nation. So there's a lot more of those types of districts out there than what we think.
What is the Great Start Readiness program?
It is a state-funded 4-year-old pre-K program that Michigan has now had for, I think, almost 10 years. And so we've been very fortunate as a state to offer this. So in my district, we have that program. We also have Head Start. We also offer Young Fives and full-day, everyday kindergarten. So we're really trying to make differences for our students and their families by offering such a wide array of services.
You recently created and released an early learning district self-assessment tool.
That's correct.
Okay. First of all, wow. I looked at it.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah.
Second, take me through the process. What drove the need? How did you develop it? And perhaps most importantly for superintendents, districts out there, how can superintendents use it?
The tool was designed because I am a little bit of a unique superintendent that has a strong background in early childhood ed. A lot of my colleagues around the nation do not have a background in early childhood ed. So they may have the ability to make decisions based on budget or based on information that someone else gives them, but they don't have that finite detail of, okay, what's going to make a difference for early learning and early childhood ed. So this tool quantifies all of that on a systemic level, and it gives them the resources because all of the resources are embedded within the tool. So it measures from birth through age 8 the readiness of your district in the idea of how am I going to have my organization ready to meet the needs of those children, because it is no longer a case of schools, K-12 schools should not be referred to as K-12 schools. Really, it's P20, meaning that from prenatal all the way through, when a student is 20, we are redefining schools as a hub. And so by doing that work and using this national platform of being a co-chair on a national superintendent's committee, we just thought this is the way that we can move the needle internally. And so we really worked hard, and I got feedback from that group. But actually the idea of then being able to use like the NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, they're going to help me publish this. AASA is going to co-brand it. I know that there's going to be a book that's coming that'll tie it all together, so there can be a true narrative about why it matters most.
That is terrific, and it's an impressive piece of work. When most of us were 18, we were struggling to figure out kind of how do we make sure to get out of bed in the morning and get to wherever we want to go in time. Turns out at 18, you found your calling.
I have a unique circumstance where I actually went to school thinking, and if you would have asked me as a 17-year-old as myself, what did you want to do with your life? Pro football player. How did that work out for me? Not very well. I went to college as an international business major, and I was a first-generation college student in my family. And so I had no idea. And so my mother-in-law is a big influence, and she asked me to volunteer in her preschool. And within 15 minutes of having that opportunity, I realized this was it. Like, this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And to have that luxury to say that I found what I wanted to do so early in my life, I owe a debt of gratitude to her. And then, of course, I stand on the shoulders of many other people. So Dr. Ina Shelley, retired dean at the College of Ed, also was a huge mentor to me and is really a big influence in who I am today. So I owe a lot to people that have done this before I have been here.
Terrific. And I know that you added as well before we spoke, your wife, who introduced you to your mother-in-law. Well, just want to make sure that you're covered here because
that's right. No, my wife is in the field of education herself. She's a speech and language pathologist and just an amazing person. So,
terrific.
But yeah, it's been a good journey thus far.
Well, it's pro football's loss, but Dundee's game.
No. Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.